In the scorching summer of 1887, beneath the unforgiving Arizona sun, something unprecedented was about to unfold that would shake the very foundations of two worlds. Picture this: 12 of the most fearsome Apache warriors, each a legend in his own right, standing in a circle around a single woman whose beauty was matched only by her fierce independence. These weren't ordinary men competing for an ordinary prize. These were battle-tested fighters who had survived countless raids, government pursuits, and the harsh realities of a changing frontier. But here's what nobody expected: not the tribal elders, not the white settlers, and certainly not the warriors themselves. This Apache woman, whose very presence could command respect from the most hardened fighters, would turn her back on all 12 of these magnificent warriors. Instead, she would choose someone so unlikely, so unexpected, that it would become the stuff of legend. She chose a simple cowboy, not a war chief, not a wealthy trader, not even someone from her own people. A dusty, weathered cowboy with calloused hands and a gentle heart who had wandered into their territory with nothing but his horse, his integrity, and a story that would change everything. This is that story, a tale of love that defied every rule, crossed every boundary, and proved that sometimes the heart knows truths that the mind cannot understand. It's a story of courage, sacrifice, and the kind of love that comes along once in a lifetime, if you're lucky enough to recognize it when it does. The desert wind carried whispers of change across the sacred lands of the Chiricahua Apache in the summer of 1887. Maria Luz Delgado stood at the edge of the mesa, her long black hair dancing in the evening breeze as she watched the sun paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold. At 23, she possessed a beauty that had become legendary throughout the territory, not just among her own people, but among traders, soldiers, and settlers who spoke her name in hushed, reverent tones. But Maria was far more than just a beautiful face. She was the daughter of Chief Victorio Delgado, one of the most respected leaders among the Apache bands that still roamed free in the rugged mountains of southeastern Arizona. Her mother, Elena, had been a gifted medicine woman whose knowledge of healing herbs and spiritual ceremonies had saved countless lives. From both parents, Maria had inherited not just striking features, but also an intelligence that could cut through deception like a blade through silk, and a spirit that refused to bow to any man's will. The Apache way was changing, and everyone knew it. The white man's government had been pushing harder each year, trying to force the remaining free bands onto reservations where their spirits would slowly die like caged eagles. Some leaders advocated for war, others for negotiation, but all agreed on one thing: strategic alliances through marriage had become more important than ever. A union with the right warrior could unite bands, strengthen territorial claims, or provide crucial military advantages in the struggles ahead. This reality had not escaped Chief Delgado's attention, nor had it gone unnoticed by the 12 most powerful unmarried warriors from various Apache bands throughout the region. Word had spread like wildfire through the network of camps, trading posts, and sacred gathering places that the beautiful and intelligent Maria would soon be choosing a husband. The implications were staggering. Whoever won her hand would not only gain a remarkable wife, but would also forge a powerful alliance with Chief Delgado's influential band. The first to arrive had been Roberto Iron Fist Nailnish from the Mescalero band to the east. He was a man of 35 with shoulders as broad as a canyon wall and scars that told the story of dozens of successful raids against enemy tribes and Mexican settlers. Iron Fist had led war parties since he was barely 20 and had never lost a single warrior under his command. His reputation for both strategic brilliance and ruthless efficiency had earned him respect even among his enemies. He brought gifts of captured horses, silver ornaments taken in raids, and the promise that his powerful family connections could help protect Chief Delgado's people in the difficult times ahead. Close behind came Diego Thunder Voice Goyathle from the Lipan Apache of West Texas. This warrior's name alone could strike fear into the hearts of Mexican rurales and American cavalry alike. Thunder Voice had earned his name not just for his booming war cry that could be heard across miles of desert, but for his ability to coordinate massive raids involving multiple bands. At 32, he had already accumulated wealth that rivaled some Mexican hacienda owners, and his strategic mind had outmaneuvered both American and Mexican military forces on numerous occasions. His marriage proposal came with promises of expanding Chief Delgado's territory eastward and sharing the vast herds of cattle and horses his raids had accumulated. From the north arrived Carlos, Night Wolf Cochise, nephew of the legendary chief, whose name he bore with fierce pride. Night Wolf had inherited not only his uncle's name, but also his tactical genius and his ability to move through enemy territory like a ghost. At 28, he was younger than some of the other suitors, but his accomplishments already rivaled those of warriors twice his age. He had personally led the rescue of over 60 Apache children from Mexican slave traders, and his knowledge of the northern territories was unmatched. His proposal emphasized the strategic advantages of uniting the northern and southern Apache bands through their marriage. The fourth warrior to present himself was Miguel Storm Rider Apache from the eastern Chiricahua bands near the Rio Grande. Storm Rider had earned his name during a legendary raid where he had led his warriors through a devastating thunderstorm to attack a Mexican garrison, appearing out of the lightning and rain like supernatural beings. His ability to read weather patterns and use natural phenomena to his advantage in warfare had become the stuff of legend. At 31, he commanded respect not just for his fighting skills, but for his deep spiritual knowledge and his role as a respected ceremonial leader among his people. The fifth suitor was perhaps the most controversial, Antonio Bloodhawk Mangas, son of the famous chief Mangas Coloradus. Bloodhawk carried the weight of his father's legacy and the expectation that he would one day unite all Apache bands under a single leadership. At 34, he was at the peak of his physical and mental powers, with a strategic mind that had successfully negotiated temporary treaties with both American and Mexican authorities while secretly planning for future resistance. His proposal came with the tantalizing possibility of Maria becoming the wife of a future paramount chief of all Apache peoples. From the western deserts came Francisco Desert Fox Victorio, a master of desert warfare whose ability to find water, food, and shelter in the most desolate places had saved his band through multiple droughts and military pursuits. Desert Fox understood the changing times better than most and had begun establishing secret supply caches and safe routes that would be crucial for Apache survival in the years to come. His marriage proposal emphasized practical considerations. His knowledge of hidden water sources, secret trails through impossible terrain, and his growing network of Mexican and American contacts who could provide advance warning of military movements. The seventh warrior was Salvador Eagle Eye Geronimo, a distant relative of the famous war leader whose eyesight was so keen he could spot enemy movements from distances that seemed impossible to other men. Eagle Eye had never been defeated in single combat, and had proven his worth as both a warrior and a scout countless times. His ability to anticipate enemy movements had saved numerous Apache lives, and his proposal stressed his role as a protector and his unmatched skills in keeping people safe during increasingly dangerous times. One Swift Arrow Chua arrived from the southern bands that regularly crossed into Mexico for raids and trade. Swift Arrow was famous for his incredible speed and accuracy with both bow and rifle, but more importantly, he had developed extensive contacts among Mexican revolutionaries and bandits who could potentially become allies against American expansion. His proposal included offers of safe passage through Mexican territory and access to weapons and ammunition that would be crucial for future resistance efforts. The ninth suitor was perhaps the most spiritually powerful, Pedro Spirit Walker Nache, a medicine man and warrior whose visions had accurately predicted several military encounters and natural disasters. Spirit Walker's spiritual powers were widely respected, and many believe his dreams came directly from the spirit world. His marriage proposal emphasized the spiritual protection and guidance he could provide, as well as his ability to communicate with supernatural forces that could aid Chief Delgado's people in their struggles. Luis Mountain Lion Cochise, another member of the prestigious Cochise family, represented the 10th Potential Alliance. Mountain Lion had spent years studying the white man's ways, learning to read and write in both English and Spanish while never abandoning his Apache identity. This unique combination of traditional warrior skills and modern knowledge made him incredibly valuable as both a fighter and a negotiator. His proposal emphasized his ability to navigate both worlds and potentially secure better terms for his people in future dealings with the American government. The 11th warrior was Joaquin Fireheart Lozin, whose sister had been the famous woman warrior Lozin. Fireheart had learned much from his legendary sister about unconventional warfare and had developed innovative tactics that combined traditional Apache fighting methods with new strategies designed to counter modern military technology. His proposal stressed his commitment to preserving Apache ways while adapting to changing circumstances, and his proven ability to train young warriors in both traditional and modern combat techniques. Finally, the 12th and most mysterious suitor was Ricardo Shadow Dancer Jew, whose band operated deep in the Sierra Madre Mountains of Mexico. Shadow Dancer was legendary for his ability to appear and disappear without a trace, leading successful raids and then vanishing into mountain strongholds that no enemy had ever discovered. His proposal was the most ambitious of all, offering Maria a life of complete freedom in the remote mountain sanctuaries where Apache ways could be preserved unchanged regardless of what happened in the outside world. Each of these 12 warriors represented not just individual strength and accomplishment, but also different approaches to the challenges facing Apache peoples. Some advocated for continued resistance and warfare, others for strategic accommodation and negotiation. Some offered traditional Apache ways of life, others proposed adaptation to changing times. All were men of exceptional ability and achievement, and any Apache woman would normally consider herself fortunate to receive a proposal from even one of them. But Maria Luz Delgado was not any Apache woman. She had grown up listening to her father's counsels, learning the intricacies of tribal politics and the complexities of survival in a rapidly changing world. She understood better than most that her choice would have implications far beyond her personal happiness. The warriors she chose would gain significant influence within her father's band and potentially among other Apache groups as well. Her decision could tip the balance between peace and war, between accommodation and resistance, between survival and extinction. The formal courtship period had been set to begin with the next full moon, still 2 weeks away. During this time, each warrior would have the opportunity to present his case not just to Maria herself, but to her family and the tribal council. There would be demonstrations of skill, presentations of gifts, recitations of accomplishments, and formal speeches outlining each suitor's vision for the future. The competition promised to be intense, with each warrior bringing his finest possessions, his most impressive achievements, and his most persuasive arguments. Chief Delgado had made it clear that the final choice would rest with Maria herself, a somewhat unusual arrangement that reflected both his deep love for his daughter and his respect for her exceptional intelligence and judgment. This decision had been controversial among some of the more traditional members of the tribe, but the chief had stood firm. In times of great change, he argued, old ways of making decisions might not serve them well. Maria's choice would be respected, whatever it might be. As Maria stood on the mesa that evening, watching the last light fade from the western sky, she felt the weight of expectation settling around her like a heavy blanket. Tomorrow would bring the first formal presentations from the warriors, and within a month she would need to make a decision that would affect not only her own life, but potentially the fate of her entire people. She had known most of these warriors since childhood, had heard stories of their exploits around countless campfires, had seen them demonstrate their skills at tribal gatherings and ceremonies. Each was exceptional in his own way, and she could understand why any of them would make an advantageous match from a political and practical standpoint. But as she contemplated the choice ahead of her, Maria found herself troubled by questions that seemed to have no easy answers. Was it enough to choose a man based on his political connections and military accomplishments? Should she prioritize the security and advancement of her people above her own personal desires? Could love and duty be reconciled, or would she be forced to choose between them? These questions swirled through her mind as the desert stars began to appear overhead, offering no guidance for the momentous decision that lay ahead. What Maria could not have known as she stood there in the gathering darkness was that fate was about to introduce a 13th possibility into her carefully ordered world. Miles away to the east, a solitary rider was making his way across the desert, leading a pack horse and following a course that would bring him into Apache territory within the next few days. This rider was no warrior seeking her hand in marriage, no politician looking for advantageous alliances, no wealthy trader hoping to buy his way into tribal favor. He was simply a cowboy named James Jim Mitchell, a 28-year-old drifter from the cattle ranges of Montana who was making his way south in search of work and a fresh start after a devastating drought had destroyed the ranch where he had worked for 5 years. Jim had no way of knowing that his path was about to intersect with one of the most significant marriage competitions in Apache history. Nor could he have imagined that his arrival would completely transform the carefully laid plans of 12 accomplished warriors and one remarkably independent young woman. But destiny has a way of ignoring carefully made plans, and sometimes the most important events in our lives come disguised as simple coincidences. As Maria finally turned away from the mesa edge and walked back toward her father's lodge, she passed a medicine woman who was studying the pattern of stars overhead. The old woman looked up at Maria with eyes that seemed to see beyond the present moment and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Change comes on the wind, daughter. Not the change that men plan for, but the change that spirits send when the time is right. Keep your heart open, for the path you walk may lead to places you never expected to go. Maria nodded respectfully to the elder and continued on her way, but the words echoed in her mind as she settled into her sleeping robes that night. Tomorrow would begin the formal courtship period that would determine her future, but somehow she sensed that her story was just beginning to unfold in ways that no one could predict or control. The morning sun had barely cleared the eastern peaks when the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the valley floor, announcing the beginning of what promised to be an extraordinary day. The 12 warriors had assembled near Chief Delgado's lodge, each dressed in his finest regalia and accompanied by the gifts he intended to present. The air crackled with tension and barely contained competitive energy as these legendary fighters prepared to vie for the hand of the most sought-after woman in Apache territory. Maria emerged from her family's lodge wearing a traditional dress of soft doeskin decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the morning light like captured stars. Her hair was braided with silver ornaments, and turquoise jewelry adorned her neck and wrists. But despite her beautiful appearance, those who knew her well could see the uncertainty in her dark eyes. She had spent a sleepless night contemplating the choice before her, and dawn had brought no clarity to her troubled thoughts. Chief Delgado stepped forward to address the assembled warriors and the growing crowd of tribal members who had gathered to witness this historic competition. His voice carried clearly across the camp as he outlined the rules that would govern the courtship period. Each warrior would have 3 days to present his case, demonstrate his skills, and make his formal proposal. The presentations would be judged not only by Maria herself, but also by a council of elders who would consider the political and practical implications of each potential alliance. Iron Fist stepped forward first, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the ceremonial ground. He had brought an impressive display of wealth and power. 20 captured horses, silver ornaments that gleamed in the sunlight, weapons of exceptional quality, and bolts of fine cloth obtained through trade with Mexican merchants. As he began to speak, his deep voice commanded attention from everyone present. Daughter of Chief Delgado, he began, I offer you not just my heart, but the strength of my arm and the wisdom of my experience. Together, we can build an alliance that will protect our people from the storms that are coming. My band controls the eastern passes, and our warriors are ready to defend Apache lands against any enemy. Choose me, and you will be the wife of a war leader whose name is feared from the Rio Grande to the Colorado River. Iron Fist then demonstrated his prowess with various weapons, showing an accuracy with both bow and rifle that drew murmurs of appreciation from the watching crowd. His presentation was impressive, and Maria nodded respectfully as he concluded with a formal recitation of his lineage and accomplishments. But those who watched her carefully noticed that her expression remained politely neutral, showing no special warmth or enthusiasm. Thunder Voice followed with an even more elaborate presentation. He had brought musicians and dancers from his own band, turning his proposal into a spectacular performance that told the story of his greatest victories. His gifts included rare turquoise stones, captured military weapons, and a magnificent black stallion that had once belonged to a Mexican general. His speech emphasized his vision of expanding Apache territory eastward and his proven ability to outmaneuver both American and Mexican forces. Beautiful Maria, Thunder Voice declared, his powerful voice carrying to every corner of the camp. "I offer you a future filled with glory and expansion. Together, we will lead raids that will be remembered for generations. Our children will inherit lands stretching from the sacred mountains to the great river, and our names will be spoken with reverence by Apache people yet unborn." The demonstration that followed was truly spectacular. Thunder Voice had brought some of his finest warriors, and together they reenacted one of his most famous victories, complete with realistic battle tactics and coordinated maneuvers that showed his exceptional leadership abilities. The crowd was clearly impressed, and several elders nodded approvingly at the display of military skill and organization. Nightwolf took a different approach, emphasizing stealth and intelligence over raw power. His presentation included detailed maps drawn on specially prepared buffalo hides, showing secret routes through the Northern Territories and hidden locations where supplies could be cached. His gifts were more practical than ostentatious: superior weapons, tools of exceptional quality, and information that could prove vital to Apache survival. "Wise Maria," Nightwolf said quietly, his voice carrying despite its lack of volume, "I offer you not empty boasts of future conquest, but proven knowledge of how to keep our people alive in changing times. The white man's army grows stronger each year, but they do not know the hidden paths that my uncle taught me. Choose me, and together we will ensure that Apache children have safe places to grow up, even when the storm clouds gather." His demonstration involved a complex tracking exercise where he located and identified various hidden objects scattered around the camp, showing skills that seemed almost supernatural. He then led a small group of warriors through a series of maneuvers that illustrated how superior knowledge of terrain could allow smaller forces to defeat much larger enemies. Maria watched this presentation with obvious interest, asking several technical questions that showed she understood the strategic implications of what she was seeing. As the morning progressed, each warrior presented his case with increasing creativity and passion. Storm Rider brought a captive eagle that he released after a ceremony asking for the blessing of the sky spirits on his proposal. Bloodhawk presented a war shield that had belonged to his famous father, along with detailed plans for uniting all Apache bands under a single leadership. Desert Fox demonstrated his legendary ability to find water by locating 3 hidden springs within a mile of the camp. But just as Eagle Eye was beginning his presentation with an impressive display of marksmanship, shooting arrows through incredibly small targets at distances that seemed impossible, a lookout posted on the nearby ridge began signaling urgent warnings. A lone rider was approaching from the east, moving slowly and apparently without hostile intent, but still requiring investigation according to tribal security protocols. Chief Delgado dispatched a small patrol to intercept and question the stranger, while the presentations continued with slight tension added to the already charged atmosphere. Eagle Eye completed his demonstration by shooting an arrow completely through a silver peso tossed into the air, drawing gasps of amazement from the watching crowd. But everyone's attention kept drifting toward the eastern approach where the unknown rider was being escorted toward the camp by the Apache patrol. Jim Mitchell had been traveling for 6 days since leaving the last white settlement behind, following a roughly southern course through increasingly difficult terrain. His destination was the Mexican border country, where he had heard that large ranches were hiring experienced cowboys to help manage vast herds of cattle in regions too dangerous for inexperienced hands. The pay was supposed to be excellent for those willing to take the risks, and Jim needed money desperately after losing everything in the Montana drought. He had not intended to enter Apache territory, but a series of wrong turns and misleading landmarks had led him significantly off his planned route. When the Apache patrol surrounded him that morning, Jim had immediately raised his hands and made it clear that he was traveling peacefully through their lands. His calm demeanor and obvious lack of hostile intent had convinced the patrol leader to escort him to the main camp rather than simply ordering him to turn back. As Jim rode into the camp with his escorts, he found himself in the middle of what was clearly some kind of major tribal gathering. Warriors in ceremonial dress, crowds of spectators, and an air of festive excitement told him that he had stumbled into something important. His natural courtesy and years of experience dealing with people from many different backgrounds had taught him to show respect for customs he didn't understand. So he removed his hat and waited quietly while the patrol leader reported to Chief Delgado. Jim cut an interesting figure as he sat calmly on his horse, surrounded by some of the most feared warriors in the American Southwest. He was not a particularly large man, standing perhaps 5 feet 10 inches with a lean, wiry build that spoke of years of hard work rather than spectacular physical gifts. His clothes were practical rather than impressive, worn but clean denim pants, a faded blue cotton shirt, scuffed leather boots, and a battered hat that had clearly seen many miles of hard travel. His horse was a sturdy bay mare that showed good care despite the rigors of long-distance travel, and his pack horse carried a simple but well-maintained outfit of cowboy gear. What made Jim distinctive was not his appearance but his manner. Despite being surrounded by armed warriors in the middle of potentially hostile territory, he showed no signs of fear or aggression. His blue-gray eyes took in everything around him with calm intelligence, and his weathered face wore an expression of polite interest rather than concern. There was something in his bearing that suggested a man who had faced difficulties before and dealt with them through patience and good judgment rather than bluster or panic. Maria found herself studying this unexpected arrival with growing curiosity. She had seen many white men before, traders, soldiers, government officials, and occasional settlers, but this one was different. He sat his horse with the easy grace of someone truly comfortable in the saddle, and his calm acceptance of a situation suggested either remarkable courage or exceptional foolishness. The way he removed his hat in a gesture of respect indicated that he understood he was in the presence of important people, even if he didn't fully understand the situation he had interrupted. Chief Delgado approached Jim's horse and spoke in careful English, a language he had learned during years of dealing with American officials and traders. "You are far from the white man's roads, stranger. What brings you into Apache lands?" Jim's response was immediate and respectful. "I apologize for intruding on what is clearly an important occasion, Chief. I've been traveling south looking for work, and seem to have gotten turned around in this country. I had no intention of trespassing on your territory, and would appreciate directions to get back to my proper route." The honesty and directness of this reply made a favorable impression on Chief Delgado, who had dealt with enough white men to recognize sincerity when he heard it. Jim's willingness to acknowledge that he was lost, rather than making up some elaborate story, suggested a refreshing lack of the arrogance that characterized many of his race. "You are a long way from any white settlements," the chief observed. "Where exactly are you trying to go?" "The border country, sir. I've heard there's work to be had on the big ranches down there for men who know cattle and aren't afraid of hard country. I've been working cattle for 12 years, and I need employment." This straightforward explanation drew some interest from the watching Apache, many of whom had experience with cattle themselves through raids and trading. The fact that this stranger was obviously a working man rather than a wealthy landowner or government official made him seem less threatening and more worthy of respect in their eyes. Swift Arrow, whose knowledge of Mexican border country was extensive, stepped forward and questioned Jim about specific locations and people. The cowboy's detailed knowledge of cattle ranching techniques and his familiarity with the geography of the borderlands convinced Swift Arrow that the man was indeed what he claimed to be. More importantly, Jim's respectful attitude and willingness to answer questions honestly suggested that he might not be like other white men who had passed through Apache territory. Chief Delgado made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. "You may rest in our camp tonight, stranger. Tomorrow, someone will guide you to the proper trail south. But today you are welcome to observe our ceremonies if you wish. We are conducting important business." This invitation was extended partly out of traditional Apache hospitality toward travelers, but also because the chief was curious about this unusual white man who showed such calm composure in potentially dangerous circumstances. Jim accepted graciously, dismounted, and allowed young warriors to care for his horses while he was led to a place where he could sit and observe the ongoing presentations. As the formal proposals resumed with Swift Arrow's demonstration of incredible speed and accuracy with various weapons, Jim found himself fascinated by the skill and artistry on display. He had heard stories about Apache warriors all his life, but seeing their abilities demonstrated in person was truly impressive. More than that, he was struck by the obvious intelligence and thoughtfulness that went into each presentation. These men were not savage fighters as popular stories portrayed them, but sophisticated leaders making carefully reasoned arguments about complex political and military strategies. But it was Maria who captured his attention most completely. Even without understanding the language or the cultural context, Jim could see that this was an exceptional woman. The way she listened to each presentation with careful attention, asked thoughtful questions, and maintained her dignity under what was obviously intense pressure showed a character that transcended cultural boundaries. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her obvious intelligence and strength that made the deepest impression on the watching cowboy. Mountain Lion's presentation emphasized his unique knowledge of both Apache and white cultures, and he conducted part of his speech in fluent English to demonstrate his abilities. Fireheart followed with an impressive display of innovative military tactics, using wooden models to illustrate battle strategies that combined traditional Apache methods with adaptations designed to counter modern weapons. Finally, Shadow Dancer concluded the first day's presentations with a demonstration that bordered on the supernatural. He seemed to literally disappear and reappear in different parts of the camp, moving with a silence and stealth that defied explanation. His proposal emphasized freedom and independence, offering Maria a life in mountain strongholds where Apache ways could be preserved unchanged regardless of what happened in the outside world. As the sun began to set and the formal presentations concluded for the day, Jim found himself invited to share the evening meal with Chief Delgado's family. This honor was extended partly because of traditional hospitality, but also because the chief wanted to learn more about this unusual visitor. The conversation that followed, conducted in a mixture of English and Spanish with some Apache words thrown in, revealed Jim to be an intelligent and thoughtful man with interesting perspectives on the changing frontier. Jim had grown up on a small farm in Kansas before the drought, and grasshoppers destroyed his family's livelihood. He had learned to work cattle on the great ranches of Texas and Colorado before moving north to Montana. His travels had brought him into contact with many different kinds of people: Mexican vaqueros, Chinese railroad workers, German immigrants, French trappers, and various Indian tribes, including some peaceful Apache bands who traded with the ranchers. What impressed Maria and her family most about Jim's stories was his obvious respect for people regardless of their background. He spoke of learning valuable techniques from Mexican vaqueros, of Chinese workers who had shown him better ways to care for horses, and of Indian guides whose knowledge of the country had saved his life on more than one occasion. This attitude was remarkably different from that of most white men they had encountered. As the evening progressed and the conversation became more relaxed, Jim found himself telling stories about some of his more interesting experiences on the trail. He had a natural gift for narrative and a gentle sense of humor that drew smiles even from the normally serious warriors. His tale of trying to rope a particularly stubborn bull with the help of a one-eyed Mexican vaquero had everyone laughing, and his description of surviving a blizzard in the Montana mountains by following the lead of an old Indian woman who seemed to read the weather like a book drew respectful nods from his listeners. But it was when Maria asked him why he had left Montana that Jim's true character became most apparent. He spoke honestly about the drought that had destroyed the ranch where he worked, about staying to help his employer try to save what cattle they could even when it became clear the situation was hopeless, and about his decision to head south only after every possible option had been exhausted. A man has obligations to the people who have treated him fairly, Jim said simply. I couldn't just ride away when things got difficult. We tried everything we could think of, but sometimes the weather and circumstances are just too much to overcome. When it became clear that Mr. Henderson couldn't afford to keep any hands on, I wished him well and started looking for a place where I might be useful again. This attitude of loyalty and responsibility resonated strongly with Apache values, and Maria found herself increasingly interested in this soft-spoken stranger who seemed so different from other white men she had met. As the evening concluded and arrangements were made for Jim to sleep near the horse herd, she realized that for the first time in weeks, her thoughts were not entirely focused on the difficult choice she faced among the 12 distinguished warriors who sought her hand. Jim settled into his bedroll that night, with his mind full of the extraordinary things he had witnessed. The skill and intelligence of the Apache warriors had impressed him greatly, but it was the image of Maria, beautiful, dignified, and obviously struggling with a momentous decision, that stayed with him as he drifted off to sleep under the star-filled desert sky. He could not have known that his unexpected arrival had already begun to change the carefully ordered competition for her hand, or that tomorrow would bring developments that no one could have predicted. The second day of presentations dawned with an unexpected complication that no one had anticipated. During the night, a messenger had arrived from the south carrying urgent news that would affect every decision made in the coming days. A large force of Mexican soldiers, accompanied by American cavalry units, was moving north toward Apache territory as part of a joint military operation designed to clear the borderlands of what they termed hostile elements. This news transformed the marriage competition from a matter of personal and political preference into a question of immediate survival strategy. Each warrior's proposal now carried additional weight as tribal leaders considered which alliance would best serve their people in the dangerous times ahead. The atmosphere in the camp grew more tense as men who had been friendly competitors the day before began to view each other as rivals for resources that might determine life or death for their respective bands. Chief Delgado convened an emergency council at dawn to discuss the military threat and its implications for the ongoing courtship ceremony. The decision was made to continue with the presentations as planned, but with added emphasis on each warrior's ability to contribute to the tribe's defense and survival. Maria found herself under even greater pressure as the elders made it clear that her choice could significantly impact their ability to respond to the approaching military threat. Jim Mitchell awakened to find the camp buzzing with urgent activity and military preparations. Although he couldn't understand all the Apache conversations swirling around him, the body language and tone made it clear that something serious was developing. When Chief Delgado approached him with a translator and explained the situation, Jim's response was immediate and characteristically straightforward. "If there's military trouble coming, Chief, I should probably clear out of your territory as soon as possible. The last thing you need is to have a white man in your camp if American soldiers show up." This offer to leave immediately, despite the obvious danger of traveling alone through country that would soon be swarming with hostile troops, made a strong impression on everyone who heard it. Here was a white man who was more concerned about potential problems he might cause for his Apache hosts than about his own safety. Chief Delgado studied Jim carefully for a long moment before making a decision that would surprise everyone, including himself. "You may stay if you wish, Cowboy. You have shown respect for our ways, and a man who offers to face danger for the sake of others' safety is welcome at our fires." The second round of presentations began with Iron Fist demonstrating advanced military tactics designed to counter the combined Mexican-American military strategies. His knowledge of enemy weapons and formations was impressive, and his proposal now emphasized his ability to coordinate defensive operations across multiple Apache bands. But as he spoke, his eyes kept drifting toward the place where Jim sat quietly listening, clearly troubled by the presence of a white man during such sensitive discussions. Thunder Voice followed with an even more aggressive presentation, proposing immediate offensive action against the approaching forces before they could establish strong positions in Apache territory. His plan called for coordinated raids against enemy supply lines and a series of ambushes designed to convince the military commanders that occupation of Apache lands would be too costly to maintain. His presentation was passionate and well-reasoned, but several elders looked troubled by the implications of such aggressive resistance. Night Wolf took a different approach, emphasizing intelligence gathering and strategic withdrawal to previously prepared strongholds. His detailed knowledge of hidden routes and defensive positions offered the possibility of avoiding direct confrontation while maintaining tribal cohesion and freedom. His presentation included maps showing how the various Apache bands could coordinate their movements to stay ahead of enemy forces while maintaining communication and mutual support. As the morning progressed, each warrior adjusted his proposal to address the new military realities while still competing for Maria's personal preference. Storm Rider emphasized his spiritual powers and his ability to call upon supernatural aid in times of crisis. Bloodhawk spoke of uniting all Apache peoples under a single war leadership that could effectively coordinate resistance against overwhelming enemy forces. But it was during Desert Fox's presentation that an unexpected incident occurred which would dramatically alter the course of events. As he was demonstrating his knowledge of water sources and supply caches, a young Apache scout came racing into camp with news that a small patrol of Mexican soldiers had been spotted less than 5 miles to the south, apparently having outpaced the main military force. The immediate reaction was organized chaos as warriors grabbed weapons and prepared for possible combat. Chief Delgado quickly deployed scouts to gather more information while organizing defensive positions around the camp. In the midst of this activity, something happened that no one had anticipated. Jim Mitchell, who had been sitting quietly throughout the morning presentations, suddenly stood and approached Chief Delgado. "Chief, if you're willing to trust me with a horse and a rifle, I might be able to help gather intelligence on those soldiers. I speak Spanish fluently, and I can pass for a drifting vaquero if anyone spots me at a distance." The audacity of this offer, a white stranger volunteering to scout enemy forces for an Apache war party, left everyone speechless for several seconds. Iron Fist was the first to recover, stepping forward with obvious anger. "This is madness. How do we know this man is not a spy sent to learn our defenses? He arrives just before military forces appear in our territory, and now he offers to scout for us? The timing is too convenient to be coincidence." Several other warriors nodded agreement, and for a moment it seemed that Jim might find himself facing a circle of very hostile Apache warriors. But Maria surprised everyone by speaking up in defense of the unexpected volunteer. "If this man were a spy," she said in a clear voice that carried across the camp, "would he offer to ride alone into danger where he could be easily captured or killed? Would a spy draw attention to himself by volunteering for hazardous duty, or would he try to remain invisible and gather information secretly?" Her intervention created a brief silence as everyone considered her logic. Chief Delgado looked back and forth between the angry warriors and the calm cowboy who had made such an unexpected offer, clearly weighing the risks and potential benefits of accepting help from this stranger. Thunder Voice stepped forward with a compromise suggestion. "Let the white man prove his good intentions. If he wishes to scout for us, let him go, but with Apache warriors accompanying him at a distance. If he betrays us, they can ensure he does not return to report our positions. If he serves us faithfully, we will know his heart is honest." This suggestion appealed to the practical Apache mindset, offering a way to gain potentially valuable intelligence while maintaining security. Chief Delgado nodded approval, and within minutes Jim found himself mounted on a fast Apache pony and heading south toward the reported enemy position, accompanied by 3 experienced warriors who would shadow his movements while remaining concealed. As Jim rode toward what could easily be his death, he found himself wondering why he had volunteered for such a dangerous mission. The logical answer was that helping these people gather crucial intelligence was simply the right thing to do, regardless of the personal risk involved. But if he was honest with himself, he had to admit that Maria's quick defense of his character had touched something deep in his heart. The scouting mission proved to be both easier and more dangerous than anticipated. Jim successfully located the Mexican patrol, 12 soldiers led by a sergeant who was obviously unfamiliar with the terrain and relying on outdated maps. By listening to their conversations while concealed in nearby rocks, Jim learned that they were an advance unit sent to locate Apache camps and report positions back to the main force, which was still 2 days' march to the south. But as he was preparing to withdraw with this crucial information, Jim spotted something that changed everything. The Mexican sergeant was questioning a captured Apache boy, no more than 12 years old, who had apparently been taken while gathering medicinal plants for his grandmother. The soldiers were using increasingly harsh methods to try to force the terrified child to reveal the location of his people's camp. For Jim, this created an impossible moral dilemma. His mission was to gather intelligence and report back, not to engage in combat with enemy forces. Any action he took would risk exposing not only himself, but also the Apache warriors who were positioned to support him. But watching a child being tortured was something his conscience simply could not accept. Jim's decision was made with the quick instincts that had kept him alive through 12 years of frontier life. He circled around the Mexican position until he found their horse herd, then created a carefully planned distraction by stampeding the animals down a rocky slope where their hoofbeats would echo dramatically. In the confusion that followed as the soldiers tried to catch their scattered mounts, Jim managed to reach the captured boy and cut his bonds. The rescue was successful, but it came at a cost. One of the Mexican soldiers caught a glimpse of Jim during the escape and managed to wound him with a rifle shot that grazed his left shoulder. Worse, the sergeant now knew that Apache allies were operating in the area, information that would certainly be reported to the main military force. Jim made it back to the Apache camp with the rescued boy and detailed intelligence about enemy strength and intentions, but he was bleeding significantly and clearly in need of medical attention. His arrival created a sensation as the story of his voluntary rescue of an Apache child spread rapidly through the camp. Even the warriors who had been most suspicious of his motives found it difficult to doubt the sincerity of a man who had risked his life to save an Apache boy he had never met. Maria took personal charge of treating Jim's wound, using the medical knowledge she had learned from her mother. As she cleaned and bandaged the bullet graze, she found herself studying this remarkable man who seemed so different from anyone she had ever known. His willingness to risk his life for a stranger demonstrated a kind of courage that went beyond mere physical bravery, and his obvious pain from the wound did nothing to diminish his concern for whether his intelligence gathering had been successful. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly as she worked on his shoulder. "Why risk your life for a child you didn't know?" Jim's answer was simple and direct. "Some things are more important than personal safety, ma'am. I couldn't ride away and leave a child in that situation, regardless of the consequences." This response crystallized something that had been building in Maria's mind since Jim's arrival. Here was a man whose actions consistently demonstrated the values that Apache culture held most dear: courage, loyalty, protective instinct toward children, and willingness to sacrifice personal welfare for moral principles. The fact that he was white seemed increasingly irrelevant compared to the content of his character. The third day of presentations proceeded under a cloud of military urgency, with each warrior now emphasizing his defensive capabilities and strategic planning skills. The intelligence that Jim had gathered was invaluable, confirming that the Apache bands had perhaps 48 hours to decide whether to fight, flee, or attempt to negotiate before the main enemy force arrived in their territory. Eagle Eye presented an impressive plan for coordinated sniper attacks that could severely damage enemy morale while minimizing Apache casualties. Swift Arrow outlined escape routes into Mexico that could be used if defensive positions became untenable. Spirit Walker conducted a ceremony seeking guidance from supernatural forces about the best course of action in the crisis. But the most significant development of the day came when Mountain Lion, whose knowledge of both cultures made him particularly sensitive to changing dynamics, made an unprecedented suggestion during his formal presentation. "Beautiful Maria," he said, "the arrival of this cowboy in our camp may be more than simple coincidence. Perhaps the spirits have sent him to show us new possibilities for survival in the changing world. His actions have proven his character, and his knowledge of the white man's ways could be valuable to our people. I propose that you consider not just the warriors of our own people, but all possibilities for alliances that might serve us in the difficult times ahead." This suggestion, that Maria might consider marrying outside her own people, created an immediate uproar among some of the more traditional tribal members. Iron Fist was particularly vocal in his opposition, arguing that such a union would violate Apache customs and weaken tribal identity at a time when cultural unity was more important than ever. But Thunder Voice surprised everyone by supporting Mountain Lion's suggestion. "If this man's actions prove that he understands Apache values better than many of our own allies," he argued, "then perhaps blood matters less than character. Our people have survived by adapting to new circumstances, not by refusing to consider new possibilities." The debate that followed was intense and sometimes bitter, with tribal members expressing strongly held opinions on both sides. Some argued that desperate times called for desperate measures, while others insisted that abandoning traditional ways would destroy everything they were fighting to preserve. Through it all, Maria sat quietly listening, clearly struggling with decisions that became more complex with each passing hour. Jim, still weak from blood loss, but unable to rest while such momentous decisions were being debated, found himself in the unprecedented position of being discussed as a potential husband by people whose language he barely understood. The irony was not lost on him that he had set out looking for work as a cowboy and had somehow become entangled in Apache tribal politics and a marriage competition involving the most beautiful and remarkable woman he had ever encountered. As the sun set on the third day of presentations, Chief Delgado announced that Maria would make her decision the following morning after a night of prayer and meditation. The approaching military threat made further delay impossible, as the chosen warrior would need to begin organizing defensive preparations immediately. That evening, as the camp prepared for what might be their last peaceful night in their traditional territory, Maria walked alone to the mesa where she had stood 3 nights earlier contemplating her future. But this time, she was not alone in her vigil. Jim Mitchell, despite his wounded shoulder and against all protocol, had followed her at a respectful distance to ensure her safety during her meditation. When she realized he was there, Maria felt no anger at the breach of custom. Instead, she found herself grateful for his protective presence and touched by his instinctive understanding that she needed solitude to make her momentous decision. They stood together in companionable silence as the stars appeared overhead, both knowing that tomorrow would bring changes that would alter the course of their lives forever. "I must choose," Maria said finally, speaking in English to ensure he would understand her meaning. "Yes, ma'am," Jim replied quietly. "And whatever you decide, it will be the right choice because it comes from your heart." His simple faith in her judgment moved Maria more deeply than all the elaborate proposals she had heard from the 12 distinguished warriors. Here was a man who trusted her wisdom without trying to influence her decision, who offered support without demanding anything in return. As they stood together under the vast desert sky, Maria realized that her choice had already been made, though its implications would shock everyone in the camp, including herself. The night passed slowly as both Maria and the competing warriors prepared for the dawn that would determine not only her personal future, but potentially the fate of her entire people. None of them could have predicted the decision she would announce, or the chain of events that would follow from her unexpected choice. But change was coming whether they were ready for it or not, and sometimes the most important decisions in life are the ones that seem impossible until the moment they become inevitable. Dawn broke gray and threatening over the Apache camp, with dark clouds gathering on the southern horizon, as if the sky itself reflected the tension that gripped every person in the settlement. The approaching storm seemed symbolic of the military forces that were marching steadily closer, carrying the power to destroy the traditional Apache way of life forever. But an even more immediate storm was about to break as Maria prepared to announce her decision. Chief Delgado had called for the formal conclusion ceremony at sunrise, knowing that whatever choice his daughter made would need to be implemented quickly. The 12 warriors assembled in their finest regalia one final time, each man confident that his combination of accomplishments, political connections, and passionate proposals would prove decisive. The tribal elders took their positions around the ceremonial circle, prepared to witness and formally recognize Maria's selection of a husband who would become a crucial leader in the difficult times ahead. Jim Mitchell stood at the edge of the crowd, his left arm still in a sling from the bullet wound he had suffered while rescuing the Apache boy. He had asked Chief Delgado for permission to witness the ceremony before departing for safer territory, and the chief had granted this request out of respect for the courage Jim had shown. Jim expected to hear Maria announce her choice of one of the distinguished warriors, offer his congratulations to the couple, and then ride south to continue his interrupted journey to the border country. What happened next would be remembered and discussed around Apache campfires for generations to come. Maria emerged from her family's lodge wearing a dress of pure white doeskin decorated with symbols of both war and peace, indicating her readiness to support whatever path her people chose in the crisis ahead. Her hair was unbraided and flowed freely down her back, adorned only with a single eagle feather that had belonged to her grandmother. She carried herself with a dignity befitting a chief's daughter, but those who knew her well could see the determination in her dark eyes that suggested she was about to make an announcement that would surprise everyone present. Chief Delgado spoke first, formally presenting his daughter to the assembled warriors and tribal members. "My daughter Maria has listened to the proposals of 12 distinguished warriors, each of whom would bring honor to our family and strength to our people. Her choice has been made according to Apache custom, with the approval of the tribal council and the blessing of our ancestors." Maria will now announce her decision. The silence that followed was absolute, as every person in the camp focused their attention on the young woman who stood calmly in the center of the ceremonial circle. Even the wind seemed to pause as Maria looked slowly around the gathering, her gaze touching briefly on each of the 12 warriors who had competed for her hand. "I have listened carefully to each proposal," Maria began, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the camp. "Each warrior who has spoken is a man of great accomplishment who would bring honor to any woman. Their courage, skill, and dedication to our people are beyond question, and their offers of alliance would strengthen our tribe in the dangerous times ahead." Iron Fist stepped forward slightly, clearly expecting to hear his name called. Thunder Voice straightened his shoulders in preparation for what he assumed would be his selection. Night Wolf maintained his characteristically calm expression while internally preparing for the responsibilities that would come with marriage into Chief Delgado's family. But Maria continued, "I have decided that none of these warriors is the husband that the spirits intend for me." The collective gasp that arose from the crowd was audible from a quarter-mile away. Several of the elders looked shocked, and more than one warrior appeared to be having difficulty processing what he had just heard. The idea that Maria would reject all 12 suitors had never been seriously considered by anyone, and the implications of such a decision were staggering. Bloodhawk was the first to find his voice. "What are you saying, Maria? These are the finest warriors of all the Apache bands. If none of us is worthy of you, then who could possibly be acceptable?" Maria's answer would become one of the most famous statements in Apache oral history. "I choose the Cowboy." The silence that followed this announcement was so profound that it seemed to stretch on forever. Every eye in the camp turned toward Jim Mitchell, who stood frozen in shock at the edge of the crowd. His face had gone completely pale, and he appeared to be having difficulty believing what he had just heard. The idea that he might become Maria's husband had never seriously occurred to him, despite the growing attraction he felt toward this remarkable woman. Chief Delgado was the first to recover his composure, though his voice betrayed his own surprise. "Daughter, are you certain of this choice? This man is not Apache. He has no political connections among our people, no warriors to bring to our defense, no wealth to contribute to our survival." Maria's response was delivered with quiet conviction that left no doubt about the sincerity of her decision. "He has something more valuable than wealth or political connections, Father. He has proven his character through his actions. When our child was in danger, he risked his life to save him without thought of reward or recognition. When military information was needed, he volunteered for a dangerous mission to help people he had known for only 2 days. When others spoke of what they would do for our tribe, he simply did what was right." She turned to face Jim directly, and the entire camp could see the emotion in her eyes as she continued. "This man understands Apache values better than many who were born to them. He shows courage without boasting, loyalty without condition, and respect for others regardless of their race or status. He has asked for nothing and given everything. If these are not the qualities we want in a leader, then we have forgotten what it means to be Apache." The reaction to Maria's explanation was immediate and explosive. Iron Fist shouted his objections to what he saw as a betrayal of Apache traditions. Several other warriors joined in, arguing that marrying outside the tribe would weaken Apache unity at a time when strength was desperately needed. Some of the tribal elders expressed concern about the political implications of such an unprecedented union. But other voices rose in support of Maria's choice. Mountain Lion reminded the crowd that Apache survival had always depended on adaptability and the ability to form unexpected alliances. Thunder Voice surprised many by arguing that a man who would risk his life for Apache children might indeed make a better protector than one who only sought personal advancement. Several of the women present spoke up in favor of judging men by their actions rather than their ancestry. The debate that followed was passionate and sometimes heated, with fundamental questions about Apache identity and survival being argued from multiple perspectives. Through it all, Jim stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening around him. Finally, Chief Delgado raised his hand for silence. "This is my daughter's choice to make," he declared. "According to our customs, she has the right to select her own husband, and I will honor that right. But the man she has chosen must also agree to this union. Cowboy, do you accept my daughter's proposal?" All eyes turned to Jim, who found himself facing perhaps the most important decision of his life. He looked at Maria, standing in the center of the circle, beautiful and dignified despite the chaos swirling around her. He thought of the courage she had shown in defying tradition and social pressure to follow her heart. He considered the implications of accepting her proposal, the responsibility of helping to lead an Apache band through the most dangerous period in their history, the necessity of learning new customs and ways of life, the certainty that their union would face opposition from both white and Apache society. Jim's answer came from the heart rather than the head. "Ma'am, I would be honored to be your husband if you'll have me, and I'll do everything in my power to serve your people faithfully." The formal betrothal ceremony that followed was conducted with a mixture of traditional Apache customs and improvised adaptations to accommodate the unprecedented nature of the union. Maria and Jim exchange vows in both English and Apache, promising to support each other and work together for the welfare of their people. Chief Delgado formally welcomed Jim into the tribe and presented him with weapons and clothing appropriate to his new status as a war leader. But the celebration was necessarily brief, as the approaching military threat required immediate attention. The intelligence Jim had gathered indicated that the combined Mexican-American force would reach Apache territory within 24 hours, and critical decisions about resistance strategy needed to be made quickly. The marriage announcement had created new political dynamics within the tribal leadership. Some warriors who had previously competed for Maria's hand now found themselves working alongside their former rival, while others struggled to accept Jim's sudden elevation to a position of authority. The crisis situation forced everyone to focus on survival rather than personal grievances, but underlying tensions remained. Jim's first test as an Apache war leader came sooner than anyone expected. Late that afternoon, scouts reported that an advance column of enemy cavalry had moved faster than anticipated and was now less than 10 miles from the main camp. Immediate evacuation to defensive positions became necessary, but the complicated logistics of moving an entire tribal community while maintaining security required careful coordination between multiple leaders. Jim surprised everyone by proving remarkably effective at organizing the evacuation effort. His experience managing large cattle drives had given him valuable skills in coordinating the movement of groups, supplies, and animals across difficult terrain. More importantly, his outsider status allowed him to suggest strategies that broke free from traditional Apache tactical thinking while still respecting cultural values. The plan that emerged from rapid consultation between Jim, Chief Delgado, and the remaining warriors combined Jim's logistical expertise with Apache knowledge of local terrain and military traditions. The tribal community would split into 3 groups, each taking a different route to predetermined meeting points in the mountains. This would make it impossible for enemy forces to capture or destroy the entire band, even if one group was discovered. Maria insisted on accompanying the most dangerous group, which would serve as a decoy to draw enemy attention away from the families and elders taking the safer routes. Jim found himself leading this group despite having been married for less than 6 hours, a responsibility that would have been overwhelming under normal circumstances, but was made even more challenging by the skeptical attitudes of some Apache warriors who still doubted his competence. The evening departure was conducted with the efficiency that comes from generations of experience with emergency evacuations. But this time was different, as the Apache people were leaving territory that had been their home for countless generations, possibly forever. The emotional weight of this exodus was enormous, and Jim found himself deeply moved by the dignity and courage shown by people who were losing everything they had ever known. As the 3 groups separated in the gathering darkness, Maria rode beside her new husband toward what everyone knew would be a dangerous confrontation with superior enemy forces. The irony was not lost on either of them that their marriage was beginning with a military campaign that might well end in death for both of them. "Do you regret your choice?" Jim asked quietly as they led their group along a treacherous mountain trail in the moonlight. Maria's answer came without hesitation. "The only thing I regret is that we may not have much time together. But I would rather face whatever comes with a man I can trust completely than live safely with someone I could never truly respect." Behind them, the dozen warriors who had competed for Maria's hand rode in silence, each dealing with his disappointment in his own way. Some were beginning to recognize that Maria's choice, however shocking, might indeed prove beneficial to their people. Others remained convinced that she had made a disastrous mistake that would have terrible consequences for everyone. Ahead of them lay unknown dangers as enemy forces searched the darkness for Apache bands to destroy or capture. The survival of their people would depend on the success of strategies developed by a cowboy who had been among them for less than a week, implemented by warriors who had been trained in Apache military traditions for their entire lives. But perhaps most remarkably, the future of Apache resistance to American expansion now rested partly in the hands of a man who had been traveling south to find work on a cattle ranch when fate intervened to make him a key figure in one of the last great struggles between Native American peoples and the expanding United States. The convergence of personal love and historical forces had created a situation that no one could have predicted, with consequences that would extend far beyond the immediate crisis facing Chief Delgado's band. As the Apache raiders rode through the night toward an uncertain destiny, Maria and Jim faced not only the immediate dangers of enemy pursuit, but also the long-term challenge of building a life together across cultural boundaries that few couples had ever successfully bridged. Their love story was just beginning, but it was already clear that their union would be tested by forces far greater than the normal challenges facing any marriage. The approaching dawn would bring the first real test of whether love could indeed overcome the barriers of race, culture, and circumstance that divided their two worlds. But for now, they rode together into the darkness, united by bonds that had formed quickly, but proven themselves genuine when tested by the ultimate crucible of life and death crisis. The first gray light of dawn found the Apache decoy group positioned on a rocky ridge overlooking the main trail that enemy forces would need to use to reach the tribe's former campsite. Jim had chosen this location based on his knowledge of cavalry tactics and supply requirements, correctly predicting that the combined Mexican-American force would follow the most direct route rather than risk getting lost in the maze of mountain trails that honeycombed the region. Maria crouched beside her new husband behind a boulder formation that provided excellent concealment, while offering clear fields of fire toward the approaching enemy column. Around them, 30 of the most skilled Apache warriors waited in carefully prepared positions, their initial skepticism about Jim's leadership having evolved into grudging respect as his tactical suggestions proved both innovative and sound. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. The decoy group would launch a brief, but intense attack on the enemy column, creating enough noise and confusion to convince the military commanders that they had found the main Apache force. Then, while enemy troops deployed for a major engagement, the Apache raiders would disappear into terrain so rugged that pursuit would be impossible. This would give the other groups, carrying the tribe's families and elders, additional time to reach safety in remote mountain strongholds. But Jim had added an element to this strategy that went beyond traditional Apache tactics. Using his knowledge of military psychology gained through years of frontier experience, he had suggested that they time their attack to create maximum psychological impact rather than maximum casualties. A devastating strike followed by complete disappearance would be more unsettling to enemy morale than a prolonged engagement that gave officers time to organize effective countermeasures. As the sun climbed higher, the sound of approaching hoofbeats and wagon wheels echoed through the canyon below. The enemy column was larger than anticipated. Nearly 200 soldiers, including both Mexican regulars and American cavalry, supported by packed trains carrying supplies for an extended campaign. The size of this force confirmed what everyone had suspected. This was not a routine patrol, but a serious attempt to eliminate Apache resistance in the region permanently. Iron Fist, positioned 20 yards to Jim's left, caught his eye and nodded toward the approaching column. Despite his initial opposition to Maria's marriage choice, the veteran warrior had proven completely professional in following Jim's tactical leadership. His willingness to set aside personal feelings for the good of the mission had impressed Jim greatly and helped establish the working relationship that was essential for the group's survival. The attack began exactly as planned when the enemy column reached the narrowest part of the canyon. Apache rifles opened fire from concealed positions on both sides of the trail, creating a devastating crossfire that dropped more than a dozen soldiers in the first few seconds. The psychological impact was immediate and dramatic as disciplined military formations dissolved into chaos under the unexpected assault. But what followed demonstrated Jim's understanding of warfare psychology in ways that traditional Apache tactics might not have achieved. Instead of continuing the attack until ammunition ran low, he signaled for withdrawal after exactly 3 minutes of intense fire. The Apache warriors melted away into the rocks like ghosts, leaving behind an enemy force that was bloodied but not destroyed, confused but not completely demoralized. The psychological effect on the surviving soldiers was exactly what Jim had predicted. They had faced a devastating attack from an invisible enemy that had appeared without warning and disappeared just as suddenly. The fact that the Apache had chosen to withdraw rather than press their advantage suggested either supernatural abilities or tactical sophistication that went far beyond what the military commanders had expected to encounter. More importantly, from the Apache perspective, The attack had achieved its primary objective of convincing enemy forces that they had located the main tribal stronghold. Radio communications intercepted by Apache scouts confirmed that the military commanders were calling for reinforcements and preparing for a major assault on what they believed to be Chief Delgado's primary defensive position. The withdrawal phase of the operation proved even more challenging than the attack itself. Moving 30 people through terrain so rugged that horses had to be led rather than ridden required careful coordination and intimate knowledge of local geography. Jim found himself relying heavily on the expertise of Apache warriors who had known these mountains since childhood, while contributing his own skills in logistics and route planning. Maria proved herself an invaluable partner during this phase, serving as translator between Jim and warriors who spoke limited English while also demonstrating outdoor skills that rivaled those of the most experienced fighters. Her ability to anticipate needs and solve problems before they became critical helped hold the group together during several difficult passages where a single mistake could have resulted in casualties or capture. The reunion with the other tribal groups took place 3 days later at a hidden valley deep in the Sierra Madre Mountains, accessible only through a narrow canyon that could be easily defended by a handful of warriors. The families and elders had reached safety without encountering enemy forces, confirming that the decoy strategy had been successful in drawing military attention away from the most vulnerable members of the tribe. Chief Delgado's greeting of his new son-in-law was formal but warm, acknowledging both the success of the recent operation and Jim's growing acceptance among tribal members. The chief had received reports about Jim's performance under fire and his ability to coordinate effectively with Apache warriors despite cultural and language barriers. More importantly, he had observed the growing bond between Jim and Maria as they faced danger together and supported each other through the challenges of their unprecedented situation. The celebration that followed combined traditional Apache customs with spontaneous adaptations to honor the unusual circumstances of Jim and Maria's union. Warriors who had initially opposed the marriage found themselves toasting the couple's success in battle, while elders who had questioned the wisdom of marrying outside the tribe began to acknowledge that Jim's contributions to their survival had been substantial. Thunder Voice, who had surprised everyone by supporting Maria's choice from the beginning, offered a formal speech that helped define Jim's new role within the tribal structure. "This man came to us as a stranger," he declared, "but he has proven himself through deeds rather than words. He has shed Apache blood in defense of Apache children, and he has shed his own blood fighting beside Apache warriors. Blood and courage make a man Apache, regardless of where he was born." This statement represented a significant shift in tribal thinking about identity and membership, acknowledging that cultural adoption could be as meaningful as birth ancestry under the right circumstances. Jim's acceptance into the tribe was becoming not just a matter of marriage convenience, but a recognition of genuine character and commitment that transcended racial boundaries. The honeymoon period, such as it was, took place in a setting that was both romantically beautiful and strategically defensible. The hidden valley contained everything necessary for long-term survival: fresh water, game animals, natural shelter, and defensive positions that could be held by a small force against much larger enemies. Apache bands had used this location as a refuge for generations, and its isolation from white settlements made it ideal for preserving traditional ways of life. Jim and Maria established their household in a natural cave system that had been expanded and improved by previous occupants over many years. The combination of natural rock formations and carefully constructed additions created living quarters that were comfortable, secure, and completely hidden from casual observation. Their home became a gathering place where Apache traditions were shared with someone eager to learn, while Jim's knowledge of the outside world helped tribal leaders plan for future challenges. The cultural exchange that developed between Jim and his new Apache family proved beneficial to everyone involved. Jim's literacy skills made him valuable for interpreting written communications and legal documents that affected tribal interests. His knowledge of white business practices helped in negotiations with traders and government officials. His understanding of military tactics provided useful perspectives on defensive strategy. In return, Jim learned Apache customs, language, and survival skills that were far superior to anything he had known during his years as a cowboy. The Apache understanding of desert ecology, weather patterns, and Natural resource management was incredibly sophisticated, developed over centuries of living in one of the most challenging environments in North America. Jim's respect for this knowledge helped him gain credibility with tribal members who might otherwise have remained suspicious of his motives. But perhaps most importantly, Jim and Maria's marriage proved that love could indeed overcome the barriers of race and culture that divided their two worlds. Their relationship demonstrated that shared values and mutual respect were more important than ethnic background in determining compatibility between individuals. Their example began to influence other tribal members' attitudes toward the white world, suggesting that cooperation might be possible with individuals who showed genuine respect for Apache ways. The success of their union had political implications that extended far beyond the immediate tribal community. Other Apache bands began to hear stories about Chief Delgado's white son-in-law who fought alongside Apache warriors and lived according to Apache customs. These stories helped counter negative stereotypes that portrayed all white men as enemies of Native American peoples, opening possibilities for alliances that might not have been considered previously. As months passed and the immediate military crisis evolved into a longer-term struggle for survival and autonomy, Jim found himself playing an increasingly important role in tribal diplomacy and strategic planning. His ability to communicate with white authorities while maintaining complete loyalty to Apache interests made him uniquely valuable as a negotiator and intelligence gatherer. Maria's pregnancy, announced 6 months after their marriage, was greeted with universal celebration throughout the tribe. The prospect of a child who would embody both Apache and white heritage symbolized hope for a future where the two cultures might coexist rather than remain locked in permanent conflict. Tribal elders spoke of prophecies suggesting that such children would become bridges between worlds, helping both peoples find new paths forward. The birth of their son, named Roberto James in honor of both his Apache grandfather and his white father, marked a turning point in the tribe's relationship with the broader world. The child represented living proof that love could overcome hatred, that understanding could replace fear, and that the future might hold possibilities that no one had previously imagined. As Roberto grew from infant to toddler to young boy, he became a beloved figure throughout the tribal community. His ability to speak both Apache and English fluently made him a natural translator, while his comfort with both cultures allowed him to serve as an informal ambassador between different groups. His very existence helped normalize the idea of cross-cultural cooperation and marriage. Jim and Maria's love story became legendary not only among Apache peoples, but also among white settlers and Mexican residents throughout the border regions. Their example inspired other cross-cultural romances and helped break down barriers that had previously seemed insurmountable. Traders, military officers, and government officials who met them were often surprised to discover that such partnerships could be successful and mutually beneficial. Years later, when historians attempted to understand the complex dynamics of cultural interaction in the American Southwest during the late 19th century, Jim and Maria's marriage was recognized as a significant example of how individual relationships could influence broader social and political developments. Their union demonstrated that love, courage, and mutual respect could overcome even the most challenging circumstances. The 12 warriors who had originally competed for Maria's hand all eventually found wives and established families of their own. Several acknowledged in later years that Maria's choice had been wiser than they initially recognized, pointing to the stability and success of her marriage as evidence of her exceptional judgment in matters of the heart. Iron Fist became one of Jim's closest friends and most trusted allies, their initial antagonism evolving into deep mutual respect based on shared experiences in combat and crisis. The veteran warrior often said that he had learned more about true courage from watching Jim's quiet determination than from all his years of traditional warrior training. Thunder Voice established himself as a successful negotiator between Apache bands and government authorities, using strategies that Jim had helped develop during their time together in the mountains. His ability to understand both military and diplomatic perspectives made him invaluable during the difficult process of establishing reservation boundaries and usage rights. Chief Delgado lived to see his grandson Roberto grow to young manhood and begin his own family, carrying forward the legacy of cross-cultural understanding that had begun with a chance encounter in the desert. The chief often said that his daughter's choice had proven wiser than any decision he had ever made as a tribal leader. The hidden valley where Jim and Maria spent their honeymoon eventually became a permanent settlement where Apache families could maintain traditional ways of life while gradually adapting to changing circumstances in the outside world. The community that developed there became a model for other Native American groups seeking to preserve their cultural identity while participating in a broader American society. Jim Mitchell never did make it to the Mexican border country to work on the cattle ranches where he had originally planned to seek employment.